This case involves homicide and includes reference to claims raised in court. This episode is non-graphic, evidence-led, and told with respect for the victim and her family. Auckland at night looks clean from a distance. Glass towers, streetlights, rain reflections that make the city feel calm. And that's what makes this case hit so hard, because it isn't a remote wilderness story. It's a modern city story, solved by modern traces. On December 1st, 2018, Grace Millane goes out into central Auckland. Later that night, CCTV shows her entering a lift at the City Life building with a man she met for a date. The lift doors close, and the timeline tightens around that moment like a knot. Within hours, she is dead. And what follows is not a mystery built from nothing. It's a case built from movement. It's powered by sequence. One clip connects to the next clip until the chain becomes unavoidable. CCTV becomes the spine of this case because it doesn't need opinions. It only needs timestamps. One door, one lift, one city watching without emotion. We start with the last clean frame. Late evening, central Auckland, the City Life building. A lift closes, and the timeline tightens like a padlock turning. The next day, the footage stops feeling like life continuing and starts feeling like tasks being completed. Leave, return, leave again. A pattern that doesn't read like panic. It reads like control. The purchases are what make it cold. A suitcase, cleaning products, gloves, ordinary items alone. Until they sit inside the same locked timeline as a person who hasn't been seen since the lift. Then the rental car. Another normal step until you place it beside the timing. Cars turn distances into options. Later, the lift opens and closes again. A luggage trolley, suitcases moved through the lobby. This case wasn't solved by one perfect clue. It was solved by a chain. And once the chain exists, the story someone tells has nowhere left to hide. Grace Millane was a British tourist traveling overseas, and New Zealand was one part of a longer journey. RNZ reports she arrived in New Zealand on the 20th of November 2018. Her 22nd birthday was December 2nd, and that date becomes a brutal marker in the case because it's the moment her family expected to hear from her. When the messages didn't come back, the silence was immediate. RNZ's timeline notes she sent a final contact that night, including a photo, and then communication stopped. That detail matters because it narrows the window. This isn't an open-ended disappearance. It's a locked time frame. That night, Grace and the man she met go bar hopping in central Auckland. RNZ reports the first CCTV compilation shown at trial tracked the date night, and that Grace was last seen at about 9:40 p.m. exiting the lift with him at City Life. You don't just have witness memory, you have footage, you have timestamps, you have doors opening and closing like a metronome. And once a case has timestamps, the questions sharpen. Not what might have happened, but what happened between these minutes. One ordinary night, one lift, one closing door. RNZ's trial coverage describes him buying cleaning products, renting a car, and meeting another woman for a drink while Grace lay dead in his apartment. From this point on, the case becomes less about what the victim did and more about what the suspect did. Because movement leaves traces, and traces become proof when they repeat. RNZ's timeline reports that on December 3rd, the man drove to the Waitakere Ranges and buried Grace's body in a shallow grave. Investigators rarely solve cases through one moment. They solve cases by recognizing patterns that don't belong in a normal day. In this case, RNZ's reporting lays out a sequence of purchases and movements that prosecutors use to argue intentional cleanup and concealment. The first pattern is repetition. Leave by return, leave again. The City Life building becomes a hub, and everything outside it becomes a supply run. That structure alone changes how a jury feels the story. The second pattern is escalation. A suitcase purchase isn't suspicious in isolation. Cleaning products aren't suspicious in isolation. But when the timeline contains a last known lift frame and then a chain of concealment-adjacent purchases, isolation stops being a defense. RNZ's CCTV article details supermarket purchases, including cleaning products and gloves, and the hiring of a rug doctor carpet cleaner. Those choices become arguments about intention because they suggest a focus on surfaces and trace removal. Then comes the behavioral disconnect that people struggle to process. A drink in Ponsonby, another date, a normal social scene sitting on top of an abnormal private reality. That's why it stays in headlines. It feels like two timelines running in parallel. In court, behavior isn't presented as evil. It's presented as inconsistent with innocence. That's the legal logic. People who panic after an accident call for help. People who fear consequences tend to tidy, delay, and distance. RNZ also reported on the web of lies, the differing accounts he gave as the case tightened. When investigators hear multiple versions, they don't treat it as storytelling. They treat it as adaptation to new evidence. That matters because modern cases are often built like this. CCTV anchors movement, purchases anchor opportunity, and changing statements anchor consciousness of guilt. Each element reinforces the others. On December 5th, Grace was reported missing after she didn't respond to birthday messages. Grace's father arrived in New Zealand on December 7th and made a public appeal for information. Those moments matter because they show the human side of the clock. Families don't live in time snubs. They live in hope. Police treated the investigation as homicide, and the man was charged with murder. That is the official moment the case crosses from where is she to what happened to her. On December 9th, Grace Millane's body was found in the Waitakere Ranges. The search ends, but the case does not, because now the timeline becomes courtroom material. Grace Millane is not a plot device. She's a victim with a family. At trial, RNZ reports the first CCTV compilation covered the date night and lift footage, and the second compilation covered his movements after her death. That structure is important because it shows how prosecutors build a narrative in court without guessing. Now we run the CCTV spine in full detail, the way jurors had to, because this is where modern surveillance turns hours into proof. CCTV doesn't just capture moments in this case. It becomes the skeleton the entire narrative hangs from, because it doesn't argue, and it doesn't soften details to make them easier to hear. The spine begins with the last confirmed lift frame at City Life. After that, the footage shown in court becomes a sequence of actions, like someone moving through tasks rather than emotions. CCTV showed him buying a suitcase, then purchasing cleaning products, including disinfectant and gloves, then returning again. Each clip by itself is ordinary. The chain is not. He hired a rental car and returned, turning a city day into a mobility advantage. He also met another woman for a drink in Ponsonby, a detail that becomes chilling because it sits inside the same locked window. He hired a rug doctor carpet cleaning machine. In court, details like this are not vibes. They're argued as evidence of intent and cleanup. Then comes the lobby movement that anchors the night's evidence. CCTV showed him with a luggage trolley and suitcases moving through the lift and toward the vehicle. This is why CCTV is so powerful in court. It doesn't tell you motive. It tells you sequence. And sequence is how juries test whether a story can survive contact with reality. That the following morning, CCTV showed him buying a red shovel, paid with cash, and continuing movements consistent with concealment and disposal. He cleaned his car, fueled it, and disposed of items, including at a bin in Albert Park. The city kept recording each ordinary step, and that's the spine. Each clip doesn't need to prove everything. It only needs to connect cleanly to the next clip until the chain becomes unavoidable. The differing accounts he gave, describing a web of lies that became part of how the case was understood publicly. When evidence tightens, stories tend to shift to protect the speaker. RNZ's key evidence reporting ties CCTV and post-event actions into a coherent chain, date-night footage, then the sequence of suitcase, cleaning products, rental car. This is the foundation that makes contradictions matter. A modern case file often hinges on two forces: what a camera sees and what a person says when they believe nobody can contradict them. The conflict between those two forces is where prosecutions live. In court, truth isn't a feeling, it's a standard. The prosecution must prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt, and it does that by stacking objective anchors: CCTV, purchases, movements, and the credibility of explanations offered against those anchors. That's why the two compilation structure matters. First, the date-night footage establishes contact and last known public movement. Second, the post-event compilation establishes behavior consistent with concealment and disposal. The defense position reported in coverage was that Grace died during consensual sex and it was an accident. In a courtroom, a claim like that is tested against the full timeline, not against how sympathetic it sounds. Juries are instructed to evaluate credibility. That means asking whether post-event actions look like someone seeking help or someone buying time. Suitcase purchases and cleaning runs don't prove intent alone, but they become powerful when paired with the absence of emergency response and the presence of concealment behavior in sequence. The point of showing the second date is not to moralize, it's to establish state of mind. It's a prosecutor's way of saying the day didn't look like shock, it looked like management. Courtrooms also care about consistency. If a person gives multiple differing accounts, that doesn't automatically prove guilt, but it does damage reliability. And reliability is what juries use when physical evidence doesn't speak in words. In November 2019, the jury returned a guilty verdict. For the court, that's the formal conclusion of the trial phase. For the family, it's only the start of living with what happened. On the 21st of February 2020, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. That is the legal outcome in plain terms. Name suppression applied for a period in New Zealand and later lapsed. RNZ reports he can now be named as Jesse Shane Kempson. The Supreme Court judgment records that the application for leave to appeal was dismissed. Formal language that matters because it reflects the legal system closing its final doors on the conviction in that proceeding. Later reporting also notes the Supreme Court dismissed his bid for appeal, meaning legal avenues were exhausted at that point. This case became globally known because it sits at the intersection of modern travel and modern dating, and because Auckland recorded enough to rebuild a night after it ended. On paper, it's a solved case. Timeline, charge, trial, verdict, sentence. But emotionally, it remains unresolved for the people who loved her, because no verdict restores a life.